The Ukraine war's latest peace formula. Ukraine willing to trade territory for security? The tone and tenor of pursuing serious peace talks have dramatically changed since the U.S. elections in November. Despite reports of North Korean involvement in offensive operations in Russia's Kursk region, and approval from the U.S. and United Kingdom to use their longer-range ATACMS missiles and Storm Shadow cruise missiles to attack targets inside Russia, the war is not necessarily winding down. Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, a former Russian president, and a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, is openly discussing additional territorial acquisition in Ukraine, posing a new obstacle for peace. While there are undoubtedly numerous obstacles to surmount for achieving peace in Ukraine, there are some encouraging indications. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has publicly stated on numerous occasions that the restoration of pre-2014 borders, when Russia took and annexed Crimea, is an absolute requirement for any peace deal. Additionally, President Zelensky has repeatedly stated that a Russian withdrawal is a prerequisite for any peace negotiations, a position that is completely unrealistic. Multiple polls show that Ukrainian people agree with the President Zelensky's position, with a majority stating that negotiations to end war should take place but not concede territory. President Zelensky's hard stance appears to be changing as the Trump effect adds incentives to find alternative solutions to end the war in Ukraine. France invited President-elect Donald Trump to attend the reopening of the repaired Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. While in Paris, President-elect Donald Trump unexpectedly met with French President Emmanuel Macron and President Zelensky at the French presidential palace, where they engaged in substantive discussions about the peace in Ukraine, according to reports. A primary Ukraine concern since the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 was the need for security from what it feared from Russia. There was no official announcement after the meeting between the three leaders in Paris, but the discussion has switched from attempting to reclaim all the captured land in Ukraine, including the Crimea, to guarantees for security. This is unfortunate for Ukraine, but is realistic, as the likelihood of Ukraine recapturing all its territory would be unlikely even with increased Western military support, and would have been highly costly to Ukrainian lives. It appears that leaders have acknowledged, perhaps even coerced, the cold reality of the military situation, paving the way to overcome an obstacle to peace. After all the loss of lives and destruction of infrastructure, in addition to lost land, Ukraine cannot lead the war empty-handed. Mr. Trump and possibly Mr. Macron are pressing for Europe to provide real security guarantees. Mr. Zelensky's demand for NATO membership, which would provide Ukraine with the necessary security, has faced opposition from a number of NATO nations, including the U.S. and Germany, who are both Ukraine's biggest financial and military supporters. European leaders criticized Mr. Trump for proposing a plan he claims would end the war in 24 hours, a plan that many of them mock. The point that is being missed is that the president-elect is not wedded to a specific plan, but a blueprint of Europeans securing a peace in Ukraine with U.S. support, which is both providing realpolitik realities and carrots to support Ukraine and leverage the Russians to be willing to come to the peace table with a true intent to end the war. President Macron appears to be pursuing this strategy during his meetings with Polish officials in Warsaw this last week. The discussion revolved around the deployment of European NATO troops into Ukraine, specifically along with well-established interim border between Russia and Ukraine. Although these troops would not be protected by Article 5 of the NATO treaty, it would be a risky endeavor for NATO to attack these forces in order to gain access into Ukraine. The apparent discussion in Warsaw was that for France and Poland to take the lead in this potential peace scenario. Some Western allies compare the loss of territory and concept of an interim border to the division of Germany into East Germany, the DDR, and West Germany, FRD, which eventually merged into a single nation after more than 4 decades of division. The German scenario suggests to Ukraine that the loss of territory need not necessarily be permanent, as seen in the German model. The discussions have significantly altered our understanding of what is feasible and acceptable in resolving the issues, or in establishing the conditions necessary for peace or a lasting ceasefire. Russia's willingness to accept a large contingent of hostile, or what it views as hostile, NATO troops on its borders presents a significant obstacle, though, given its ostensible opposition to Ukraine's NATO membership. Ukraine would also seek assurances regarding its eventual membership in NATO, as well as a long-term commitment to NATO troops remaining in the country and maintaining their established strength. NATO, for its part, would need to continue to upgrade its infrastructure to support a large troop contingent in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and to improve its capacity to move ever larger amounts of troops from west to east as a form of deterrence against potential Russian aggression. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has expressed the need for NATO to adopt a military mindset and consider raising defense spending targets from the current goal of 2% of GDP, which is not being met, to the Cold War levels typically maintained at 3% of GDP. The goal is to improve the deterrence by dedicating roughly 0.5% of that GDP to support Ukraine's military capability. What does Russia gain from the proposed peace deal, which places Western troops on its borders, grants Ukraine de facto NATO membership, provides Ukraine with Western military budget support, and, according to the European Union, aims to develop Ukraine's defense industry? Russia is likely to advocate for Mr. Medvedev's proposal and incorporation of additional Ukrainian territory into its borders, presumably encompassing the territory it has won in combat. Presumably, this would encompass the substantial natural resources of the Ukrainian Donbas region. Russia would also get Ukrainian-occupied parts of the Kursk region back. Russia is likely to request financial incentives from the West, which would include the lifting of all sanctions, the unfreezing of Russian assets in the West, and the return of seized interest that Ukraine used for secured loans. The West and Ukraine will have to give something material in return to Russia if this proposal is to be the peace formula in Ukraine. It is unclear what exactly a peace will look like, but it seems abundantly clear that a peace is coming to Ukraine in one way or another. Naturally, Russia poses a significant challenge, as it has the potential to reject any negotiations that Secretary Rutte has suggested could occur. Therefore, it is crucial for the West to remain more discreet about its peace proposals to avoid the Russians from pursuing further concessions and expanding their territory through actions on the battlefield. Despite the potential influence of Russia, it is unlikely that Russia will remain at war for the full 4 years of the Trump administration. Similarly, China is unlikely to support the continuation of the war for another 4 years, given the challenges it will face under President Trump. The war is expected to conclude in the near future, but the nature of the peace will also be crucial in determining whether it is a temporary respite before a larger European war.